Unfortunately, hatred has always been part of American life and American politics. There are always politicians who want to score points by attacking others for their immutable characteristics. We thought it would be helpful today to have an expert shed some light on why hatred has always been part of our politics and why it seems so especially prevalent today. So we're happy to welcome Lecia Brooks of the Southern Poverty Law Center, both to Bellingham and to the Bellingham City Club. Lecia got up awfully early yesterday and flew in from Montgomery, Alabama, by way of Charlotte, North Carolina, and Seattle, and finally to here. And will, among other activities, inform us of how the Law Center defines and identifies hate groups, publicizes them, often sues them, and sometimes even shuts them down. Again, now given given the average age of most of us in the room, we're probably quite familiar with the Southern Poverty Law Center, as they have been with us for most of our adult lives. Founded 45 years ago in 1971, they have become our nation's premier nonprofit organization monitoring the activities of domestic hate groups. They publish investigative reports, train law enforcement officers, share key intelligence, offer expert analysis to the media and to the public, and today to us. So Ms. Brooks leads the Law Center's efforts on key initiatives and social justice issues. She also serves as director of the Civil Rights Memorial Center in Montgomery, Alabama, which was designed by the renowned Maya Lin, whom you well know did the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C. Prior to joining the center in 2004, she worked 12 years for the National Conference for Community and Justice. So, our format today consists of comments by Ms. Brooks, followed perhaps by some questions by me developed by the program committee, and then questions from you, our badge-wearing members. So all that said, please welcome Lecia Brooks to the Bellingham City Club.
Thank you so much. Chuck is really a jewel. He's a wonderful, wonderful person. I do want to thank and acknowledge everyone on the program committee for allowing Chuck to bring me here. I appreciate it. And especially want to thank Patricia, the president, who kind of rules with an iron thumb. I'm going to try to be really quick. She's so efficient. And congratulations on your tenure, and I want to congratulate you, Dan, chair-elect. And I understand I'm going to miss the coronation. I'm so sorry. But I really appreciate you all being here. I want to thank the staff at the Bellingham City Club. Those cookies were delicious. This is the most efficient, really, running of a large hall that I've ever seen. I'm just really amazed. Seriously. I'll pick up some potato salad on the way out. Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, how many members of the Southern Poverty Law Center? Oh, thank you. So you'll thank them for allowing me to come, and thank you for the support of our work. Thank you. Thank you. Now, as I talk, and I understand that you like to be out by 1:30, and I'm going to try to keep us on schedule, but just understand that once I start talking about the work of the Southern Poverty Law Center and just talking in general, it's really difficult to stop. I wanted to, though, direct your attention to the pictures on the wall, and I'm sorry that it's so far away for most of you. Yeah, direct your chairs to that area. This is what Chuck mentioned. It's the Civil Rights Memorial in Montgomery, Alabama, designed by Maya Lin, the artist and architect who designed the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. It's beautiful. I like to start all my presentations, whether or not we're talking about hate or whether I'm talking about our Teaching Tolerance program or just talking in general, because it really grounds the work of the Southern Poverty Law Center. We commissioned that piece in 1989, and if you can't see it, it's really beautiful. There's a wall, it's a granite wall with water flowing over it, and includes a quote from a speech that Dr. King delivered at the March on Washington for Freedom and Jobs, that famous I Have a Dream speech. It also included this. It was a paraphrase from the book of Amos, until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. And so Morris and Joe and my colleagues at the Southern Poverty Law Center, we try to remind ourselves that we've done good work, but justice is not flowing down like water, nor righteousness like a mighty stream just yet, so we have much to do. The memorial on the table in front starts with Brown v. Board in 1954. That's said to begin the modern American civil rights movement. And it chronicles some of the major events that happened along the timeline. I'd like to focus on a tumultuous year during the civil rights movement, 1963, a full decade after it began. We had a beautiful thing, the March on Washington, but we also had a bombing at 16th Street Baptist Church that killed 4 girls. Those events led to the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which we stand on today, and we're quite proud of that. The memorial continues to 1968, the assassination of Dr. King in Memphis, Tennessee, but I want to draw your attention to that space in the middle. Maya Lin left this space beginning in 54, ending in 68, but that space is meant to hold for you and I to contemplate what we're doing to forward the cause of social justice. So what will be said about you? What will be said about me? In addition to what is said about folks who sacrificed during the civil rights movement or the martyrs of the movement. What I hope will be said about the Southern Poverty Law Center is that we did what we could. These are our founders, Morris Dees and Joe Levin. Morris, the more famous one on the left, and Joe Levin, the quiet but yet powerful one on the right. They founded the Southern Poverty Law Center in 1971, and they did not have anything to do with the civil rights movement. They weren't involved in any marches or any demonstrations, but they were born and raised in Montgomery and really saw Montgomery and the country change around them. If you recall the Montgomery bus boycott in 1955, it was in Montgomery. They saw that as a beginning of change. And then really the movement ended in Montgomery as well with the Selma to Montgomery Voting Rights March in 1964, or in 1965 rather. So they decided that they wanted to continue the legacy begun by the civil rights martyrs and started a civil rights law firm in 1971. They didn't know much about the civil rights movement, the ins and outs of it, or kind of where to proceed, where to begin, and how to proceed, so they went to Julian Bond. I hope you'll recognize Julian Bond on the bottom right. Julian Bond at that time, he was one of the co-founders of SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. He was the youngest legislator ever elected to the Georgia State Legislature. You may recall that his colleagues refused to seat him because of his stand and SNCC's stand against the Vietnam War. And Julian Bond is just a wonderful person. He passed away last year. He was the first president of the Southern Poverty Law Center and really kind of set our course to civil rights advocacy, so we think about him often. Our early cases, though, in 1971 were really suing the state of Alabama because, Joe and Morris being from there, they knew the state of Alabama wasn't going to just simply change because there was this Civil Rights Act of 1964 or a Voting Rights Act of 1965, and we continue that proud tradition today. In spite of Supreme Court rulings or what have you, Alabama is Alabama. I'd like to mention, too, that but, good things come out of Alabama. People were asking me, we had dinner last night with some of the program committee members, and folks were asking me kind of, do you get discouraged? Are you encouraged? How do you stay up? One is Joe and Morris, Morris is like 80, and Joe is approaching 76, which tells me that they were born and raised during the Jim Crow era. They were born and raised in Montgomery, Alabama, the seat of the Confederacy, and were born to inherit the white supremacy that they were born into, and changed. Instead, started the Southern Poverty Law Center. So I know that people can change, even people from Alabama. So I'm encouraged most every day. It's true. So we started suing the state. State of Alabama refused to integrate the state trooper force in addition to other things. You recall that the Civil Rights Act of 1964 banned discrimination based on race in employment and housing and education and in services, Alabama said, no, we won't hire any, sorry. So lower courts ruled that, yes, in fact, you have to, Alabama, and we'll give you a formula in which to do so. So Alabama said, well, we just won't hire anybody. And they didn't. For 15 years, we've had this case went for 15 years all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court to force Alabama to integrate the state trooper force. That's Alabama. So we won, of course. And there were other cases, suing the YMCA for refusing to open up the city pools, those kinds of issues. But it wasn't until we represented this woman, Mrs. Beulah May Donald, that we came to national attention. Now, the members of the Southern Poverty Law Center will know this story, of course. Mrs. Donald's son was 19 years old. His name was Michael. He was just a student on his way home from work, and he was abducted by two men who belonged to a group called the United Klans of America. Now, the United Klans of America was the group that was responsible for setting the bomb at 16th Street Baptist Church that killed those 4 girls. They were also responsible for killing a white woman named Viola Liuzzo, who's memorialized on the Civil Rights Memorial. She was helping with the Voting Rights March, and they killed her. And then they also attacked freedom riders, including one of the most wonderful people in the world, John Lewis. So they did terrible, terrible things during the movement. But in 1981, they abducted her son, took him to a remote location, cut his throat, and then brought him back to the neighborhood and hung him from a tree. It's referred to as the last lynching. And it was 1981, and it really, really, really disturbed. It's a disturbing image. When I try to, remind ourselves that this kind of thing used to happen all the time in the United States. And so the fact that we can refer to it now as the last lynching is rather encouraging. Morris, though, wanted to do something to hold the Klan responsible. The 2 men who abducted Michael Donald were held criminally liable and eventually found guilty, but the Klan leader who set this whole thing into motion was going to get off. So Morris said, well, let's sue the Klan in civil court. It was the first time it was ever done. It was loosely based on organized crime laws where you hold the leader responsible for the actions of their members. And we won. Or rather, his mother, Michael Donald's mother, Mrs. Donald, won. A black woman wins a civil suit against a Klan organization in Alabama. This is amazing, right? And let me add, it was an all-white jury. 1987, an all-white jury. So that, again, another reason to be hopeful. So $7 million judgment against the Klan. It's important to note that Mrs. Donald, of course, didn't get $7 million. You all know, because I understand that you're over 65 and college educated, that you know that in a civil suit, you're just going to get up to the amount. The Klan leader didn't have anywhere near that. His primary asset was a building that he had in Tuscaloosa, which was turned over to Mrs. Donald, and she sold that and bought their first family home. But it bankrupted the organization, and so that seemed like a fine strategy to mastermind Morris Dees. So he started scouring the news and seeing where, other Klan groups and other extremist groups were wreaking havoc. And we landed on a case in South Carolina where a Klan organization burned a 100-year-old Black Baptist church. And, the churches in the South, and in particular South Carolina, have tremendous history. They date back to, the enslavement of African Americans, and they hold very special and important memories for folks. It was terrible. This community was devastated. So we sued them, and it produced the largest judgment ever in a civil suit against an extremist group, $37.8 million, which was reduced later to about 32, but it still put them out of business. So continuing on, we had a suit, and you may be familiar with this one, little neighbors in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. And in that case, our client, a black woman and her son, were driving by this compound. Now, what makes this group different from the United Klans of America in Alabama is that they had a lot of property. It was up in the mountains. They had this huge space, a compound where they invited new members of their organization to come for training. They had a so-called church, they had school, they had children there, they had concerts. It was awful. the neighbors had been trying to get rid of them for some time, but it wasn't until they stopped our client and held them at gunpoint that we were able to sue them. And that came back, what was that, 6 million, 12 million? What? I can't read it. 6.3. That was Keenan versus Aryan Nation. The case in Portland, Oregon, where Tom Metzger, who was the head of white Aryan resistance, was recruiting up in Portland, and an Ethiopian grad student, Mr. Sarah, was attacked and beaten with baseball bats. And so we were able to sue him, put them out of business. That was a $12.5 million judgment against the white Aryan resistance, and that put them out of business. So our strategy is to sue these groups and bankrupt them so that they, can't continue to operate. As I said, I mean, we're a nonprofit. We don't charge our clients to represent them, nor do we share in any of the award money, nor do they get anywhere close to the award money. But it does put these groups out of business, and it does put other groups on notice that their leaders will be held responsible should something go wrong. And it's had a devastating impact on Klan organizations in particular, because it's more and more difficult for them to find people to assume a leadership position. Our most recent case against a Klan group was in Kentucky, Brandenburg, Kentucky, 2008. And this guy thought, he was getting rid of all his assets before we went to trial, but we were able to sue them and put them out of business too. So the fact of the matter is that these litigation strategies have been extremely successful. We've probably had 15, 18 major cases against hate and extremist groups across the United States since the Donald case in '84. However, hate groups still exist. You can't sue every group, can't be everywhere. This kind of litigation takes a lot of resources and a lot of time. So one of the ways we came up with also to marginalize or negatively impact these groups is through the tracking and monitoring of hate groups. Now, it's a little bit different now because oftentimes people find it difficult to recognize who's a hate group and who's not a hate group. This image you're seeing now, clearly recognizable neo-Nazis, right? They're marching down the street, and anyone would say, oh, that's a hate group. They're skinheads or something. However, what about, a group of people like this? This is a group of folks who belong to Pastor Terry Jones's church in Florida. This is a group, I don't know if you can read it, but it says Islam is of the devil. So this pastor had these t-shirts made for his congregants, and they're wearing them. And this is the guy who called for the burning of the Quran. Do you remember that? So is that a hate group? The Southern Poverty Law Center would say that anyone who maligns another group of people because of their often immutable characteristics and promotes that is a hate group. So now we find when we began tracking and monitoring hate groups in 2000, it was primarily Klan groups and recognizable neo-Nazi groups and all that. Everybody understood that and was fine with that. Now, though, the face of hate looks different. We might identify this pastor of a Christian church who's Islamophobic and encourages adherents to also promote or practice Islamophobia, and we'll become criticized for naming this church as a hate group. But they are, in fact, a hate group. And the reason we do it is not to increase our numbers, artificially increase the numbers of active hate groups in the United States, but we recognize that hateful rhetoric and propaganda produces an increase in hate incidents or hate crimes that are perpetrated against those individuals. So we want to call that out and stop them. We know it's true because, of course, we still see, these horrendous hate crimes that are perpetrated against Sikhs. Sikhs and Hindus are disproportionately targeted for hate crimes because of the Islamophobia and anti-Muslim sentiment in the United States post 9/11. You may recall this was in, 2012? Yeah, 2012, when Wade Michael Page went into a Sikh temple in Oak Creek, Wisconsin, and murdered 6 people. and injured 4 others and then killed himself. He belonged to, he was a believer in neo-Nazism, and he had he called himself a hate musician and had some records out. We still don't know why he went in there and killed those people, probably just to make a name for himself. Of course, when we talk about hate, we don't want to forget that anti-Semitism and acts of anti-Semitism continue to persist. This guy, loser guy, I call Frazier, his name is Frazier Glenn Miller, and I think he's 81 or 82, but he's been an avowed anti-Semite his entire life. How sad is that? How sad is that? Just his entire life. And we believe that he wanted to go out in a bang of glory by killing as many Jews as possible, because that's what he said he wanted to do. This is from 2014 in Overland Park, Kansas. You remember where this guy went to some Jewish community centers to kill all the Jews, ended up killing 3 people who were not Jewish at all. And he was arrested. He's doing, Heil Hitler, and freely admits what he was doing and why he did it. And he's had a lifelong history. He used to belong to a Klan organization. He was a Klan leader. He had a neo-Nazi paramilitary group for a long time. He threatened Morris Dees, and we sent him to prison for some time, but he's since been out and wanted to do something before his time was up. So these kind of hate crimes are real. And again, I just want to underscore, this is why we try to bring attention to the existence and work of active hate groups in the United States, because that's what this produces. Now, not all hate certainly stems from hate group ideology or the influence of hate groups, although we recognize that just hate sometimes just permeates, as Chuck said, it's been with us forever, and it's just a kind of a part of who we are. I like to remember this story. It happened in 2011 in Jackson, Mississippi. Could have happened anywhere, but it happened in Jackson, Mississippi, and not many people know about it. This man, James Anderson, was on his way home from a club one night, 49 years old. He's walking along, and these white kids come up in a car and rob him and beat him, and then one of the guys gets in his truck and runs over him in his truck. Did anybody remember seeing that? It was all over CNN. It was a terrible, terrible, terrible thing. His friend, these teenagers, apparently, they lived in a community, I think it was called Brandon, that was just a suburb outside of Jackson. And as the case unfolded, it appeared that this group of kids would do this regularly, that they would go into Jackson for fun to attack and beat up poor people and or black people. This is what they did for fun. So these kids that beat up James Anderson that night, but the majority of them, after they beat him up and robbed him, they got back in their cars and went off to McDonald's. And Brandon, the guy who ran over him, he said, I'll see you later, got something to do. He and his girlfriend were in the truck. Ran over Mr. Anderson, then met his friends later at McDonald's and told him what he did. Well, as the investigation unfolded, as I say, they found out that this was happening regularly. Other victims who had been victims of these robberies and attacks came forward and said that happened to me too. So by the end of it, just last year, there were 10 kids that were indicted on federal hate crime charges for this behavior. And how does that happen, right? We see it all the time after folks, especially younger people, are arrested. Like, well, did you know, or was there any sign? Did you notice anything? Oh no, we have black friends. I don't know what happened. And yet it happened. So now we have 10 young people who are, well, Brandon will be in prison the rest of his life, and Mr. Anderson is dead. This is kind of what is happening across the United States. So we produce this map that we call our hate map, and we produce it every year. We wipe it clean every year, and every year we identify what we call the active hate groups in the United States. This is a map for 2015, because we're always looking one year back. Now, those that are closer to the screen will notice that there's a high concentration in the southeast, and no one's ever surprised by that. However, I would draw your attention to the Northeast. There's always been a high concentration of active hate groups in the Northeast. And then California, my home state, more than its fair share, has come in number one on occasion. California comes in number one often, New Jersey, Florida, and then you see yourselves in the Pacific Northwest. Now, for 2015, we identified 892 active hate groups in the United States. Now, that represents a 14% increase over the numbers for 2014. Now, you see, we started in 2000 and kind of, going up. Some of that is because we're doing a better job of identifying the groups. I should also say that the way we identify the active hate groups are, we read hate crime publications and websites, police stories, citizens reports, those kinds of things. They may have resulted from some criminal activity, but a lot of them have not. So I should say that you don't have to have committed a criminal act to land on SPLC's hate crime list or hate group list, but you do have to have that ideology or belief that maligns a whole group of people. So you see it went up and went up and up and up in 2008. And we remember what happened then. That's when President Obama was elected. Went down a little bit, went up, and then kind of stayed steady at 2012 through the re-election, and then dropped. And some people say, well, why is that? Well, because there was really nothing they could do about it after, he was reelected in 2012, and so the group started, well, we got to regroup, what can we do? We have a few years to kind of figure this out. And then we see it shot up again when there's an opportunity, when the presidential election is upon us. Now, your state has 8. Washington State has 8 active hate groups, and you can find this information on our website. The majority of your groups are neo-Nazi. They're all different types, but you'll recognize the geography better than I, and you'll know if it makes sense that there are active hate groups in what appears to be the northwest kind of corridor. I don't know what's there, but you will. I was joking last night about. People in the past, no one here has asked, like, well, why do you have those hate groups in these areas and in the Pacific Northwest? And I always say, because there's a lot of white people in the Pacific Northwest. I looked up your racial demographics, and interestingly enough, the room reflects it. Let me see. 84.9% white, which someone at dinner last night, who was it? The younger guy? Ralph was saying, oh, no, it's down. It's or white population is down, people of color are up. And I'm saying, okay. This is from the 2010 census, so I understand that he said that you're hovering around 79% now, so good for you. But 1.3% black, oh my God. I guess when you guys came in, I'm like, wait a minute, I'm supposed to be the 1.3% here. But I'm happy to see everyone here. And I talk about that and joke about it because the racial demographics of the United States are changing dramatically. Obviously, not as dramatically here, but it is coming, and you need to be prepared for it. Because it is going to manifest itself, but 2, our white supremacists or white nationalists look for places like this that have a strong majority white population in which to move and set up shop. And so that puts you, at risk. So I just think it's important to kind of look at the shifts. In 1970, the United States, and we're looking at this nationwide, was about 83% white, 17% people of color. And I like to say that's what the United States likes. We like that. 83%, dominant culture, 17%, because it's a little color, a little culture, maybe some, some theater, definitely some restaurants and that kind of thing. But it's not too much. It's true. I'm telling you, it's true. This is the way we like our diversity. But today, or 2010 rather, and it's changed a little bit since then, 66% white, 34% people of color. This is 2010, and it's already changed dramatically since then. And this is like big news for places that are just beginning to experience those shifts. In California, no big deal. It's been changing for a long time. But if you look at places like the Southeast and the Midwest, this is why people are freaking out, I'm telling you. Because at 66%, that's when you start, there are different languages, there are different signs, signage is in different languages and all that, and people begin to feel like, oh my God, what's happening? What happened? Where's the United States? Okay, here's what happens. We can look at the data, and the data does not lie. We can look at these are population growth figures. Now, no one's ever surprised. The Latino Hispanic population has increased by 43% since 2000. These are population numbers. But look, Asian and Pacific Islander is right there, 43%. And Asian and Pacific Islanders are actually the fastest growing immigrant group in the United States, not Latinos, Asian and Pacific Islanders. Now, you also look, and I'm real happy about this, the Pacific Islander population is up, the indigenous Native American population's up 18%. I think it's fabulous, right? But I'd save this for last because look at the black population. People always think, oh my gosh, we get blamed for so much. And our numbers are nothing, really. We are about 12 to 15% of the total population in the U.S. That is it. And the black population, very much like the white population, is going to be stagnant and going to remain kind of there. That's it. When the U.S. Census Bureau switched to, or allowed biracial people, multiracial people to identify as more than one group, which I think should have been done a long time ago, really pulls from the black numbers and pulls from the white numbers, right? So this is what the United States will begin to look like. And people, it's more in mainstream media now, not just the demographers talking about it, but you probably heard, because everyone has, that whites will no longer be in the majority. And that they started out saying maybe 2050. Then it was adjusted to 2040. And now people are thinking like, what, tomorrow? What is going on? Really? If you look at the pie, the light blue is the white population, and then, I'm sorry, I don't remember the other ones, but the larger ones are Latino and API. Now, if we look down the road, we'll see eventually we're going to get to this point where it's not just that narrative, whites will no longer be in the majority. It's no one's going to be in the majority. And for me, I think that's a beautiful, beautiful thing. Offers us an opportunity to actually live up to those ideals that we've been talking about for a long time, and a new opportunity to figure out things anew, right? No clear majority for a while. So this is the opportunity that's presenting itself to us. And will we meet the challenge, or will we not? Some say not. Now we can look at what's happening in terms of the increase in hate group, but we can also look at what's happening to individuals as a result of the increase in hate rhetoric on the internet. There's this group that we identify, National Socialist Movement, which has a website called Stormfront. I don't know if you ever heard of it. Stormfront has over 300,000 registered users in the United States. 300,000 people who took the time to register their email address. This is not, they have even more just regular users, people who just visit the site. But the messages of hate that are proliferating themselves on the internet, especially white nationalism, is just really out of control. It's also in response to, Chuck was asking, well, why is all this happening kind of right now? The main driver for the increase in hate groups is demographic shifts. The second one, which is not as important as it was when we first began to see the increase, was the election of President Obama. And thirdly, there's presently an increase in black separatist hate groups in response to the police shootings of unarmed black men. So what we saw in 2015 was an increase in kind of mainline old school KKK groups, a little less amongst neo-Nazis, which had been experiencing an increase, and an increase in the number of black separatist groups. Now, the impact of that, though, is producing an increase in what we call domestic terrorism. And what we're trying to get everyone to talk about it in terms of domestic terrorism. We talk about foreign terrorists and the threat from jihadists in terms of killing Americans, when the truth of the matter is that right-wing extremists are responsible for the killings of more American citizens than foreign jihadists since 9/11. And you will never hear that. There have been more. One, the Sikh temple shooting was one of them. The San Bernardino shooting, it was one of the jihadists inspired, but these are really kind of American inspired. Wait a minute, I have my notes. I want to get it right. Wait a minute, because I thought it was just so fascinating. White terrorists have killed more Americans on American soil than Muslim terrorists. 18 homegrown terror attacks between 2004 and 2015. The most recent were in San Bernardino shootings that killed 14 people and wounded 21. And there were 18 attacks by the American right wing that killed 48. So Muslim-inspired jihadists, 45. Right-wing white terrorists, domestic terrorists, 48. So we're running pretty neck and neck. But we're real concerned that our government officials, Department of Homeland Security, and local law enforcement agencies, we're concerned that they're not keeping their eye on the ball in terms of the threat from domestic terrorists, because it is very real. We put out this report that's from the Stormfront. We identified over 100 killings were directly connected to folks who had been on that Stormfront site. Probably most famously, though, we're aware of this guy, right? Dylan Roof. Dylan Roof was a shooter at Emmanuel Church in South Carolina, and everyone knows, and it's true, that he was inspired after visiting quite frequently the website of the Council for Conservative Citizens. Now, the Council of Conservative Citizens goes back to the Civil Rights Movement, right? It was a White Citizens Council. So all of these things are connected and sometimes just named differently, but it's the same thing. So Dylan, like a lot of disenfranchised white kids today, will go to the website and read about what they called white on black crime and how black people were attacking white people, and in particular those old stereotypes and lies about black men and white women. And that really got him going. He would read the site religiously. He read there that that whites needed to stand up. Somebody needed to do something and to stand up against these black people. And so Dylan said, okay. He was 19 years old. He said, okay. And he did it. And that's why he did it. And so, again, that underscores the importance of why it's important for us to call out these hate groups and hateful websites, because they are influencing people to engage in hate crimes. And in this case, one of the most heinous hate crimes in the history of the United States. And he doesn't deny it at all. One of the only good things that came out of this is that the Council for Conservative Citizens website had to kind of shut down, because all this time they were denying their culpability in hate. They said, we're not a hate group. We don't preach hate. We don't, and this proved that they in fact do. We produced a report right before the Charleston shooting, actually called "The Age of the Lone Wolf," and these are people that we're calling we call them lone wolves because they go to a website, are influenced and inspired, and then create or carry out these hateful acts without any association to any hate group. They don't belong to a hate group. They're not a neo-Nazi member. They're not a member of a Klan, but they were inspired by what they read online and act out on their own. That's what happened with the Sikh temple shooting, and it happens quite frequently. One of the report talks about, I think it was at least 30 thwarted domestic terrorists or attempts at domestic terrorism were thwarted between 9/11 and today. So what we want to do, as I said, is to keep law enforcement and Homeland Security focused on this threat. One of the ways we do that is that we send these resources free of charge to law enforcement agencies across the country. We produce this magazine called The Intelligence Project that, one, publishes the hate map, but also gives information on recently targeted groups. We also produce videos for them called roll call videos, which will help train law enforcement officers on the threat from terrorist groups. I like to liken, I'm a former classroom teacher, and I remember that teachers who, in teacher education training, you get very little education, maybe one class, a semester class on multicultural education. Same thing is true for law enforcement officials. They're not trained on the threat from domestic terrorists, so we have to bring them the information, and we're happy to do so through the intelligence report. In addition to tracking and monitoring hate groups, we track and monitor what we call radical anti-government groups. Now, look at this graph, because this is really dramatic. These are radical anti-government groups. Now, remember, people will try to say, no, they're not anti-government. It has nothing to do with President Obama. Oh my God. Look, when we first started monitoring this thing, it never went above 200. Always about 130, 150, which I think is fine, for a democracy, right? There's always should be kind of a healthy check on government. That's fine, but it went straight up in 2008, 500% increase. And then you see it went down again after the re-election, but it's on the way back up. Our research also shows that there's an increase in radical anti-government groups when a Democrat is in the White House. And when a Republican is in the White House, it goes down a little bit. Research shows, just saying, that's just the truth. We also have a map that tells you, y'all have quite a few. You may not have a lot of hate groups, but you got a lot of radical anti-government groups. Now, the radical anti-government group movement is big. Okay, you recognize this. This was the takeover. Remember how long that lasted? 6 weeks. Can you believe it? 6 weeks. Oh, I call the Bundy boys, took over the wildlife refuge. Now, we were tracking Cliven Bundy since, he scared off law enforcement with snipers in in Nevada. Remember that? When they went to collect grazing fees from this man whose cattle had been grazing on government land, owed $1 million and said, I'm not paying you anything, right? So we believe that the Bundy boys were inspired to take over the refuge in Oregon because nothing happened after the Nevada standoff. Did you know that? Nothing happened. No charges were ever brought. Nothing happened. Charges were only brought after the Oregon standoff was over. Then when Cliven Bundy was arrested on his way to see his boys, then he was indicted and charged in the Nevada case. We just had our first guilty plea, came out 2 days ago, I think, from the Oregon thing. This guy pleaded guilty, yes. I participated in an armed takeover. I'm a former convict. I'm not supposed to have weapons, and yes, I was standing against the federal officer. So we believe that all the chips will fall. But what we want to encourage law enforcement, again, is that you have to take a strong stand against these anti-government folks. Now, we understand they didn't want to martyr the Bundys, and no one wants to see another Ruby Ridge, but we've got to find some way to stop these. And this is you all's territory, the Pacific Northwest and the West, you guys. I don't know. It's like it's just interesting to me, the whole kind of fight over land and what's federal land and what's public land. Like it's still up for debate. I don't know. And you also have this thing which I think it's an interesting dichotomy in that, folks really want to protect public land and the environment and all that. And then there's the other thing about, no regulation at all. Just let whoever have it, whoever gets there first, they can have it and do whatever they want. I don't know how you settle those kinds of things. But that's the West. And it appears to be becoming wild again. So I don't know. That's a kind of a bit of an overview about our hate work, but I did want to talk about kind of the day-to-day work we do as well, because we're kind of a full-purpose civil rights law firm that has this program called the Intelligence Project and also has a program called Teaching Tolerance. But our law practice, we have a couple different practice areas. We have a practice group called Economic Justice, and that's really big for us right now. I don't know if this is happening in the Pacific Northwest, but there's this return of what we're calling return of debtors' prisons. Has that begun here at all yet? Where people are criminalized for being poor, where you can't pay your fines and parking tickets and you have to go to jail. Did you know, though, that the Supreme Court ruled that unconstitutional some time ago? But we're actually, revisiting that because we're making it a crime for people to be poor. We're also finding ways to support public services or city governments on the backs of people of poor people. And we're doing that through these fines and all that stuff. I like to point out, next time you get a ticket, look at your parking ticket or your driving violation and look at what the ticket costs. In Montgomery, a moving violation, the fine for the moving violation might be like $20. The rest of it, up to $220, it goes to the courts. It supports the courts. It supports this. It supports that. Look at it. It's not at all about the fine. It's about supporting city services, and we've got to find a way to do that that doesn't involve, making poor people pay for it. Because as I say, I can pay the ticket, be mad about it and pay the ticket, but some people cannot, and it's just too much.
My name is Harriet Cleveland. I was stopped by the police at a roadblock, and that's how I assumed my tickets. And I couldn't afford to pay them, so I ended up getting arrested and going to jail for them. I was working part-time back then, and I couldn't afford my insurance. That collapsed, so I still had my license, and I got a ticket for no insurance. I went and paid half of it, and that's when my license was suspended because I didn't finish paying my tickets for no insurance. So I was doing wrong, driving while suspended, but I had to get to work, had to go pick my son up and take him to school and back and forth in the store, and that's how I ended up getting my troubles with those roadblocks. All of them were set up within half a mile from my house. I was ordered to pay JCS through the courts, $140 a month. And 40 was going to JCS, and 100 would go on my fines. If you could not afford to pay your whole 140 for that month, you have to go in every week. It was hard because I didn't like going, and I didn't have the money, and it's sort of embarrassing doing that. At my age now, I lost my car trying to pay them. I did a title loan on my car and lost that, and trying to pay my utility bills, and they're getting shut off here and there. I wanted to pay my fine, but I couldn't afford it. And like I said, it just hurt my heart that I didn't even have that to take, but I had to take something. Till it got to a point I just got tired, and I couldn't take anything anymore.
When was that?
That was like I paid them $2,000 one time when I got my income tax. And then that was in February. And in March, I just didn't have anything else to give them. So I stopped taking anything. I told the lady I would catch up, so I gave her that. I'd like to keep my word. And Esther said, Miss Cleveland, you did keep your word. You gave me that. I said, yeah. Well, I don't understand it. Like I said, I didn't know that they was a private company. I thought it from the city of Montgomery. So I just really lost a whole lot of money paying to them that didn't go onto my fine. It was a Tuesday morning. My sister had just passed. We buried her that Saturday. So I was still feeling a little down and out. I had my grandbaby with me, and I was sitting up giving him breakfast that morning, and I heard a knock on the door. And I looked from around my room because I was feeding him in the bedroom. We was watching cartoons, and I seen a police officer at my door. And in the back of my mind, it wasn't for me because I didn't figure they'd come get you for tickets. I was escorted to jail. And when I went to court, the judge asked me, Miss Cleveland, why haven't you paid your tickets? I told him I did not have the money to pay it. I can't afford it. I just got a new job. You know, can give me some time. He said no. So upstairs I went because I didn't have $1,700 to pay. About 6 of us went to jail that day. It was a sad day. It really was for me and a lot of other ones.
Okay, what I want you to remember is that one, that she mentioned, what do you call them? Traffic stops, right? And roadblocks, right? And they are being purposely placed in lower income communities, right? So it's a trap in that respect. The JCS is a private probation company that cities are working with these private probation companies because they tell them that we'll recoup all of the fines. In this city, you have $1 million in unpaid parking tickets, we'll get that for you. We won't charge you, you won't have to pay. So cities are happy to do it, right? They think they're going to get some money. But what they find out is that when the company when the company feels like they're not going to get the money out of that person, then they'll turn them in and send them to jail. Then the city ends up paying for them to be incarcerated, right? Also, recall that Ms. Cleveland had a payday loan, right? She wasn't able to pay her utility bills, you know, so those are bills compounding on one another, and she had to constantly pay off this service fee to Judicial Correction Services. We got her out, we ran them out of the state, they went to different cities, but they're really going across the southeast. Chuck says I have to stop.
Thank you. Given the time constraints, I'll ask one question, then Kate and Stan have the mic for questions from the floor. So, and I apologize for the time issue, but you have, from your presentation, everything is fine in terms of how you do your work.
Yes, sir.
But then you get a lot of criticism over the years by conservative politicians and media, by organizations that have been listed as hate groups in your reports, and by some left-leaning commentators. So how do you respond to such criticism?
That's always been the case, right? When you're exposing the truth, you're going to subject yourself to criticism. Someone said it better than me. Like if you're not doing something, if you're not being criticized, you're not doing something. I forgot who said that, but it's totally true. I wasn't able to tell you a little story about yesterday in Tennessee, Jane, or I read about Jared Taylor. They had a big retreat over the weekend, American Renaissance, and brought together all these people, Trump supporters, and we're able to talk about Donald Trump. We're nonpartisan, we're a nonprofit organization, but we can talk about Donald Trump and in fact put him on the cover of the intelligence report of the issue of the year in hate, because he has really brought hate to the mainstream. And by starting off his campaign talking about Mexican rapists and then building a wall and banning Muslims has really, and this has nothing to do with Chuck's questions, but it offers me an opportunity to tell you this, that he has opened it up to the mainstream and made it okay for people to spew this hateful rhetoric. It used to be impolite or, impolitic to say these things. But he's able to do it, and now more and more people are coming out of the woodwork. This convention, or this conference that they had in Tennessee over the weekend, I was saddened to read that it was an increase in membership. This conference happens all the time, but there were more young people there than there ever been, people under 30. And we were talking about this at dinner last night too, where, we're hopeful and want to be hopeful about a new generation. There are things to be worried about there as well. Research shows, and as evidenced by the supporters of Trump rallies and such, that they're holding on to some of the same things that older folks are. But their concerns are more amplified because they are really feeling the push and the demographic shifts. They're experiencing the shifts. So it's going to be this push-pull for at least another generation until we kind of become no major majority. But I would tell you and tell your grandchildren, you got to start talking about white racial identity and what it means to be not in the majority. It's very similar to kind of how people of color families have been talking to their kids forever, and y'all never had to do that. you have to begin to talk about what it means to be white in an increasingly diverse United States and what our role is and how we're going to work together.
I grew up in the 40s and 50s, and I was taught that you can't shout fire in a crowded theater.
Mm-hmm.
I left Berkeley in 1963 just as Mario Savio was cranking up the free speech movement. On the press lately, we saw Donald Trump saying, "I'd like to punch him in the nose." Could you discuss briefly the difference between free speech and hate speech and the state of the law in the United States?
Well, what he's been engaged in is free speech, right? It's hate speech if it vilifies or maligns a group of people. That doesn't make it illegal speech. It's just hate speech. They both exist, right? So he has a right to spew this hateful rhetoric. Any hate group has a right to organize in that way too. We can only get them or stop them when they engage in a criminal act, or do what we're doing in terms of marginalizing them in the media. We try to do that. We try to point out, we try to call on people's higher angels and say, this isn't right, and really, we shouldn't follow him. So.
Wonderful presentation. Thank you for
sir.
being here.
Thank you, sir.
I heard a very, I think, precise definition of hate group, but then you talked for a while about domestic terrorism, and I didn't hear as a definition of domestic terrorism. So I'm wondering if you could share one.
That's really good. I got to tighten up my domestic terrorism definition. Let me go back. Klan groups, before we called them hate groups or hate and extremist groups, were referred to as domestic terrorism in the 20s. They were domestic terrorist groups. So before we started identifying foreign terrorists like Muslim groups, we already had this notion of terrorists. And a terrorist, as you know, is someone who commits an act to instill fear in another group of people. The domestic terrorists carry out these acts here in the United States, and they're homegrown. Right, like the movie theater shootings, those kinds of things, or the Oklahoma City bombing. That's like the biggest case of domestic terrorism that we've ever had. But those are homegrown terrorists who carry out these acts on I hate the expression, the homeland.
I have a question. I noticed there's a number of hate groups that you listed on your map and everything. How many people does that represent in the United States?
Good question. A lot of the hate groups are small, right? And I should also, and I wanted to comp to this as well, is that a lot of them are chapter organizations, right? So, for instance, that National Socialist Movement that I talked about, they might have a chapter in Portland, and they might have a chapter in Seattle, and we count all of them. The groups, we don't have a minimum or maximum, but suffice it to say that it's not like the dad and his son and the uncle in their basement. It's more than that. It's more than that. But it could be small, very small groups. Especially these Klan groups, the memberships are dwindling. Whereas in the 20s we had, gosh, you know, 1,000,005 members of Klan organizations. Today there were probably between 5,000 and 8,000 individuals that call themselves Klan members. But the fact that they still organize as a group and still engage in leafleting and still trying to recruit new members, we think justifies our naming them as a group regardless of their size. So if I say Klan groups are 8,000, I would say neo-Nazi groups, if we look at National Socialist Movement, like 300,000 people that belong or sign up for that website. It could be 500,000, something like that, individuals on any given day. I can tell you this, that it's growing, and that's the truth. As we've also seen again with Donald Trump, this has been, and they talked about this at that conference, that he has been a boon for them. First, it was a boon. There was an increase in people signing up or joining hate groups in the age of Obama. After Obama was elected, the night of the election, more and more people began to join hate groups, and it kind of dwindled off, again after his reelection. But this thing with Donald Trump, this has brought him out of the woodwork. They feel like they can advocate. He's had robocalls from leaders of hate groups to towns, and people don't even blink an eye. He retweets from hate groups. He retweets anti-Semitic statements. He has delegates who are neo-Nazis or white nationalists, and nobody bats an eye. And they'll come more and more out of the woodwork too. Mm-hmm.
So my question is that as a mom, you know that if you've got a bully in the playground, if all you do is you fight against the bully, you just end up with more bullying. So what are you noticing from your perspective if in fact the population might be going down of like the Nazis, for example, or the KKK? What is progressing? What's emerging to counteract it from a positive? Like, how do you replace this bad habit of hate with a replacement? Are you seeing the emergence of things across the nation?
The counter is the shifting demographics, right? The counter is just as I was critical of the millennial generation in terms of some of the biased beliefs that they hold that are very similar to my generation and the prior generation. They're also more hopeful, right? There's more natural diversity that occurs. The shifting in demographics have produced young people who say, who can immediately support marriage equality, or who can immediately say that they support interracial dating and relationships. So there's been that kind of growth, right? And what we try to do through our Teaching Tolerance program is infuse the schools with these resources that promote an appreciation and support of difference. So the kids are taught at an early age. Our Teaching Tolerance program is K-12. So we're trying to infuse culturally relevant pedagogy in the classroom and tell teachers who are still 76% white, females who are teaching an increasingly diverse student population about their students. And this is how you kind of present critical literacy to them, all this kind of thing. Appreciation for diversity. We're working with that generation so that they won't become susceptible to these messages of hate later. But that's a long range plan, right? What we know though is that there's gonna be this push-pull. It just is. That's what happens historically. We're still in a continuation of the, kind of the long march from the civil rights movement. We see it in the fight over Confederate imagery. We go forward, we step back. And I should say not just racial demographics, but this whole thing about marriage equality. Now we got the trans bathroom issues. These cultural issues are really pushing people who tend to be more socially conservative, just pushing them on a lot of different ways. And they end up conflating, conflating these issues and just want to get rid of newcomers or people, cultural difference. They think that is what is responsible for all this change. If we didn't have all these, we never had these problems before. You know what I mean? So it's kind of like that. Oh, so I hear.
We have one here, please.
I had a question about the civil suits that you take out. I was wondering, how do your lawyers establish the chain between the organization and its leaders and the actual individuals perpetuating an action, especially if there's messages on their internet that influence maybe a lone wolf? How do you establish the connections in order to take out a civil suit?
How do we establish the connection? Well, I mean, we do a lot of research and information gathering. I mean, our cases are thoroughly researched. We might have people who, will tell our story for us. Oftentimes, we'll have people who will kind of flip and say, "Yeah, this is what they're about." Is that what you mean? How do we make the case? Right. Yeah, usually through their written publications or what's on their website that can make the case. If a group engages in criminal activity that is also hateful, say like in that Kentucky case, we're able to prove like, yeah, you told them, the judge ruled that, yeah, you had every expectation that your people would have beat up this guy and engaged in violent activities because that's what you preach to them, you know, all the time. So they're really kind of relatively easy cases to prove, and typically they choose to represent themselves oftentimes too. They're just not the brightest.
Can you speak to any relationship between the rising income inequality and the anger it fuels and the rise of the hate activity?
Yes. Yeah, no, that's true. That's a part of it too. And that goes with the demographic shifts, right? And I was telling them last night, I mean, income inequality has always existed. But now that we're experiencing demographic shifts, and some people are feeling it more acutely than they've ever have before, right? And so now everybody cares about income inequality, right? Also, the part of what's fueling the interest, especially for younger people, is that they recognize that I'm not going to step into that. That's not going to be my job. This is not happening for me the way, you know, it happened for my grandfather. And so people are feeling that things are being taken away from them, which really is more of an inheritance right than, you know, it's kind of, I don't know, it's kind of like I hate to say it, it could be the beginnings of the end of white supremacy, but, you know, I can hope that, but, you know, it's a pretty powerful, tool, you know, thing. So I don't know. But yeah, all of those things work together. I read today that young people, 18 to 34 or something, like for the first time since, I don't know, ever, live with their parents and aren't getting married. And sorry, I got rid of my son a couple of years ago.
We have time for one more question.
Thank you very much. I greatly enjoyed your presentation.
Thank you.
When I saw the Rodney King video years ago, I thought that was a very isolated, unique experience. Now it seems like almost on a weekly basis, it looks like the police are committing cold-blooded murder against minority groups. And I was wondering to what extent you think this is an existing problem of law enforcement officials really committing criminal acts against minority groups, and what is the perception of the police in the black community, and what do you think needs to be done in order to get the police acting in a lawful
I'm running
manner?
for president. No. No, listen. Police officers are members of the community just like you and I. And they are subject to bias and implicit bias. There's this thing called implicit unconscious bias that affects all of us. And it affects them more acutely because they're in dangerous situations. And some really bad things have happened. And some really bad, I lived in Los Angeles during the Rodney King thing. I lived down the street from where it happened, and I was very upset by it. I'm upset by an acquittal in that police officer a couple of days ago in the murder of the murder of Freddie Gray. So I'm upset about it, but I can also recognize that police or law enforcement officers, for the most part, just act on their biases. And if you or I, or when people do have guns, they act in the same way, right? So what we have to do is like address these unconscious implicit biases for all of us. And once we begin to do that, I think we'll be better at identifying so-called bad eggs that slip into the police department. I'll tell you this. At one point, and I think it was after the Rodney King verdict, I was like, oh, I'm going to be a part of the solution. I'm going to apply for a job with LAPD. Can you believe I wasn't psychologically fit? That's hilarious. So, you know, it's like they're looking for a certain thing, and this is tied to the, you know, kind of military, whatever. It's a bigger issue. My main point is that I don't want to vilify or vilify law enforcement officers because I believe that they're subject to things just like we are. They've done some bad things. I think the courts should be better in terms of holding them responsible. But I also will say when they go to trial, they're typically jury trials, and we're the ones that acquit them. Okay? So I'll just leave that there. There have been some instances like in Charleston where in the Walter Scott case, some police agencies are picking it up more quickly and just firing the person. That's great. But it's tough.
Obviously, the people are sticking around past our time because you're a wonderful presenter.
Thank you, Chuck.
You're welcome. And this is for you.
Oh.
Shall I see it?